Motzinger, and I'm highly allergic to surface conversations. So let's dig deep. Together, we'll explore creating meaningful habits, deepening our relationships, and cultivating more hope for a better inner and outer life. This is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Loneliness, grief, anger, a lot of this stuff I think fuels anxiety, because a lot of anxiety is just a separation from yourself, right? Dr. Gordon Neufeld, my mentor in developmental psychology, said all anxiety is separation anxiety. And then I tag on to that, and it's mostly separation from yourself. So I think that anxiety is a separation of your adult self from your child self, and from your mind from your body. So we learn how to live in this sort of neck up environment because we perceive it safer than going down into our bodies where all this sort of loneliness, anger, this stuff is stored, this unresolved trauma sometimes, and a lot of times it's unresolved trauma. And trauma is so overused these days. I try and use like emotional wounding or something like that, because trauma is just thrown around all over the place these days. But I think loneliness is one of those things, and especially a separation from yourself. So you're never really not lonely because you're separated from yourself, as cliche as that sounds.
I think that makes perfect sense, that the anxiety would be perhaps an attempt to reconnect with those parts of ourselves that have been, pushed to the side necessarily in order to stay alive or to stay connected to other people in other ways.
Yeah. And I think, the premise of my books and my program is that you don't really have anxiety. What you have is a state of alarm, and that alarm is still stuck in your body from, typically unresolved stuff. It can be inherited family trauma. It can be stuff that you experience, typically adverse childhood experiences, all this kind of stuff. If your little brain can't absorb it or process it, or doesn't have adults around to help you repair it at the time, it gets stuffed down, repress, suppress, whatever Freudian term you want to use, into your body. And and it just stays there, and it radiates this energy. And through this process we call interoception, where the mind is reading the body, interoception, the mind reads that alarm and it's got to do something with it. So what it does is it makes up thoughts and worries that are completely consistent with how you feel in your body. So if you're feeling alarmed, and I love the David Goggins quote that says the mind has a tactical advantage over you, right? Because it does.
Yeah,
it knows all your weak points, right? So when you get stressed, it tends to fire you into all those weak points. If you have health anxiety, it's going to start convincing you you're dying. If you have social anxiety, it's going to convince you can't leave the house. So, the mind has this tactical advantage over us. And unless we sort of root ourselves in our body and become connected within ourselves, and that alleviates the loneliness as well, not initially, but over the course of time, then we start getting at the root cause of anxiety. Because my main problem with most traditional applications, most traditional therapies for anxiety, is they try and fix the thoughts of the mind. And you're actually trying to fix a symptom. The thoughts are just a symptom of this alarm that's been held in your body for sometimes decades. So when you try and fix the thoughts, you're trying to fix a fever instead of fixing the underlying, infectious disease, instead of fixing the underlying virus. You're trying to fix a fever. And you can make yourself feel better by taking Tylenol or acetaminophen or, Advil or whatever it is, but you're basically just muting the symptom. You're not really treating the root cause, which is this, I consider, this underlying alarm that's been stored in your body, typically from unresolved wounds.
I really like the phrasing that you just said, that it's muting the symptom. And what popped into my head is that a lot of times the ways that we try to cope are ways that end up muting the signals that come from our bodies to our minds. And it wasn't that long ago that I had that kind of like aha moment, that I realized the anxiety that was happening in my mind in response to what was happening in my body still was not necessarily true. Like I had somehow managed to figure out, what's happening in my environment. I know that the thoughts that I have about that aren't necessarily true. But when it came to signals that were happening in my own body, I was like totally on board with believing whatever the thought was about that signal that was in my body. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I just want to start interrupting there more, but because it's easier, we perceive it's easier to go into our heads and worry than it is to actually go back and face that old trauma that was never really resolved. So a lot of what worry is the distraction from this alarm that's in our body. We don't want to feel the alarm. We don't want to feel the grief. We don't want to feel loneliness. We don't want to feel the abandonment that we went through. So instead, we go live in our heads and start creating these, spirals in our mind that just keep, and they keep getting worse and more intense because they have to keep us out of this alarm, because we don't want to have to go back and face that alarm. So we just get more elaborate worries. And this is why worry tends to get worse as we get older, is we create more elaborate worries in order to keep us locked in our mind, because we don't want to fear, we fear sliding back into our body and feeling that old pain.
Do you think a big part of that too is that what you talked about with the loneliness is a perfect way to talk about the fear that accompanies thinking about going back into our bodies. It's
Yeah.
like, if I have to be alone to process these things that I was already alone to begin with, that's why they're here. If we look at, the ACEs scores with adverse childhood experiences, so many of that stems back to that you didn't have anybody there with you to process what was actually happening or protect you from what was happening. So what do we do? I know obviously I'm asking about, like, what are some practical tips or practical strategies for, like, getting back into our bodies, and how do we bring people along for that
Yeah,
ride and that journey?
I think the thing that I tell everybody is, when you feel quote unquote anxious, you're really alarmed. Like, that's what you're really feeling, alarm. Anxious, anxiety is in your mind. Let me just go back a couple of steps there. Anxiety is actually two things. It's the anxious, worried thoughts of your mind. That's one. And then it's this alarm that's held in your body. So most people just put it under one umbrella. Anxiety is just this thing. My body gets upset. My mind gets upset. I break it down into two things. One is the anxious thoughts of the mind. I call that anxiety. The other is this old unresolved pain that's stored in your body that I call alarm. Now, the alarm drives the worries, drives the thoughts more than the opposite. Of course, the thoughts actually make your body feel a certain way. But I think we're much more ruled by how our body feels. Our body is kind of a representation of the unconscious mind. So if your body feels a certain way, like alarmed, your mind will make sense of that alarm with worries and thoughts. And then when you believe those worries and thoughts, the alarm gets worse. So you get caught in what I call the alarm anxiety cycle. So anxiety is not one thing, but two. It's the
Mm.
anxious thoughts of your mind and the alarm in your body. And of those two things, the alarm stored in your body is a much bigger player. And it's the player that most therapies don't even go to. Like, they may say, how do you feel about that? Where do you feel that in your body? But that's as far as they go. There isn't anything deeper than that. And therapies like IFS, I think, are starting to sort of say, hey, where do you feel that? Can you characterize that in your body? And in somatic experiencing, the modality I'm trained in specifically, that's most of what we do, is find out, slow it down. Where do you feel that in your body? So coming back, so when people feel anxious, they tell me they feel anxious. It's like, well, no, you feel alarmed, and go into your body. Where is that in your body? Get out of your head. You're never going to find the peanut butter in the tree. It's not there, right? Go into your body. That's the root cause. And it's hard because that's where the pain is. So people don't want to do that. So that's why, coming back to what you said earlier, we do need a sympathetic coach, friend, therapist, whatever, who can sit with us, as you say, because when you were a child, you didn't have that. So now you have it, maybe with a therapist, but the child in you is still like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. So it's like building that trust with that friend, that therapist, that person, that other nervous system that you can ping off, that shows you that you are safe.
When someone is attempting to do this work and they're trying to reestablish the connection between their head and their bodies,
Yeah.
I'm a parent. I have a couple of younger children, and with my son in particular, I'll ask him that question a lot. Where do you feel that in your body? And that sometimes is as far as we get. And I'm not sure what the next steps are beyond just having him feel it
Putting
in
your
his
hand
body.
over that,
And
whatever
yeah,
area
and
he
as
says.
as I'm reparenting
Yeah.
myself,
Yeah.
relearning myself how
Yeah.
to do this for myself, I'm curious, like, not just for him, but for all of us who are listening and saying,
Yeah.
okay, I want to do this. I want to get back in my body, but what does that actually look like?
Yeah. Ask him where he feels it. Ask him what, when you feel stressed, has he got a sister? Is that the idea?
Hmm.
Yeah. So when your sister stresses you out, when she does this, when she does that, where do you feel it? Like, point to me, like where it hurts, or where I don't know how old he is, but where the pressure is or whatever. And then when they show you where it is, then you immediately put your hand over that area and just sort of slowly sort of rub that area. And if you can, if it's in their midline, which usually it is, you can get a corresponding place on their back as well. And just put your hand over those two areas and just say, I've got you. We're going to hold this. We're going to hold this energy here, and we're just going to see what happens to it. We're just going to hold it, because kids, I believe, don't get enough touch.
Hmm.
And I think that that's one of the things that I will often see parents who didn't get very much touch when they grew up. I don't know how much touch you got when you were growing up, but it tends to sort of follow the same pattern. So if you didn't get a whole lot of touch when you were younger, it doesn't come naturally to you as a parent to use a lot of touch with your kids. Or you got no touch from your parents, so you're touching your kids all the time, right? So it's like, I'm not going to make the same mistake my dad did, right? So it's kind of like, but touch is a huge, huge thing, because touch brings you into the present moment. A lot of anxiety is always about the future, always. Alarm is always about the past. So alarm in your body is from unresolved stuff that's still stored in your body from your past. What you do with that is you basically project that same story in different iterations into your mind. So it's one of those things where you create the situation that you had when you were a child. And Freud called that the repetition compulsion, the unconscious urge to repeat the circumstances in your adulthood that you had in your childhood. So if you had an abandoning parent or abusive parent, you're sometimes going to pick an abandoning partner, an abusive partner. So it just, these energies that come up that we can't quite elucidate at this particular point in time. But it's understanding that kids really respond well to touch, and they also respond well to moving their bodies in a different way, like moving their
Hmm.
spines. Like, kids love yoga because it moves their spines in a different way. And when you move your spine in a different way, your whole nervous system kind of opens up. And I think that's one of the reasons why yoga, tai chi, qigong is such an effective regulator. Is it breaks that stagnation, that sort of automatic feedback loop of alarm that we run through all the time, and we tend to stay in the same position over and over and over again. And that creates this sort of familiar feeling of alarm. Anxiety, people will call it anxiety, but what it's really is alarm.
I am often so surprised when I am in yoga and I'll go back into child's pose, how immediately the floodgates open and I can feel my eyes fill with tears. And it really, I don't know why it surprises me every time, but that makes perfect sense to me, that the movement of our bodies in particular ways that is outside of how we ordinarily maintain our posture would definitely move things in different ways. I have a question for you. So
Sure.
when we talk about trauma being stored in the body, I for a long time I didn't really understand, like, what does that actually mean, like,
Yeah.
practically,
Great question.
if I know where it, and a bit about how neurons work and how the nervous system works. What exactly are we talking about? Are we just talking about the predictions that our body and our brain is used to making along motor pathways, or how, what exactly does this mean?
By your question, I can tell you know what you're talking about. That's nice. Okay, so there's two different things. Cellular memory. So if you put a cell in a petri dish, or cells in a petri dish, and you put a noxious stimulus in there, it will automatically move away. It doesn't have any neural tissue. It doesn't. It just automatically moves away. So there's cellular memory that we have in our body of things that we don't like the feeling of. Now, on top of that, there is this sense that we store trauma in the body. Now, this is a contentious topic because, and this is the way I usually approach that. So people will come, they will argue with me. They'll say, "Trauma, you can't store trauma in the body." And it's like, okay, fine. Can you store trauma at all? So if you're abused, abandoned, neglected, bullied, whatever, Do you hold that trauma, or is it just pass through you? Is it an illusion? It's like, well, no, you hold that trauma. It's like, okay, so can you separate the mind from the body? Like if I get you to get you to imagine biting into a lemon right now, can you stop your mouth from salivating?
Hmm.
Right? So your mind and body are so intimately linked together that we cannot separate them. So if trauma is held in the body, or trauma is held in the system in general, it has to be held in both the nervous tissue and the tissue of the body. So it's held in both the mind and the body. So you can't just say, well, trauma isn't held in the body. Well, if it's held in the brain, there's a place in our brain called the insular cortex. And the insular cortex has a sort of a map of the body in it. And it may be that the insular cortex is mapping the trauma onto a certain part of your body. For me, it's in my solar plexus. So maybe it is just in my brain, but I feel it in my solar plexus. So does that mean that the trauma is held in the solar plexus? No. You know, it's the whole thing about pain, right? So if you hit your finger with a hammer, is the finger painful, or is it the part of the brain? Is that what's registering pain?
Hmm.
So you can't separate the mind from the body. So therefore, trauma is stored in the body because it's stored in general, and you can't separate the mind from the body. So therefore, it is stored in both the body and the mind. Now, the caveat to that is it could be stored in the brain's representation of the body. Now we're sort of splitting, we're getting into the philosophy of it. But it's really important to understand that, yeah, you can hold trauma in your body for sure. And even if your brain just says, this is where I feel that pain. When you go through a breakup, your heart hurts, heartache. Trauma, is that held in your heart? Maybe. There's sensory neurites in the heart. So that's throws a bit of a wrench into that. But, you know, it becomes almost a philosophical argument. And does it really matter? Because I know when I help people with anxiety and they say, hey, that thing about trauma being held in my body and the alarm being held in my body, that's been the single biggest thing that's helped me move past my anxiety, is realize that I'm not some sort of, you know, mental freak that just punishes myself with my brain the whole time. There is an actual physiological reason for it. And understanding the neuroscience behind it, you know, the bed nucleus of the striatum terminalis, the amygdala, the ACC, the default mode network, knowing all these things really reassures people that, you know, my nervous system is actually acting the way it's supposed to based on the traumas that I went through that weren't resolved. Now, that was a bit of a rant, so I don't know if I answered your question.
So the last thing that you said, I think, is incredibly important, because one of the things that many people with anxiety struggle with is a lot of like this self-shaming.
Yes.
And this, why can't I just feel better? Or like everything in my life is fine. Why am I still struggling with anxiety? Or I'm doing XYZ thing and I'm struggling with anxiety again. So having even just an understanding that your body's not your enemy. Your body is doing what it's supposed to do to keep you safe, and
Right.
that you can feel like a partner to your body, I think is a tremendous relief to a lot of people. And it enables them to remove the layer of shame that keeps them from exploring different ways of helping heal.
So here's the thing about that, Morgan. So there's a part of our brain called the default mode network, right? Which is basically what your brain does when it's not actively involved in a certain task. So they found this around 2000, where they had a bunch of people on functional MRI scanners. They had to do math problems, and then they watched their brains when they between problems, and they noticed a very similar pattern in their brains. So they called it the default mode network, and now it's been really well studied. There's a part of the default mode network called the posterior cingulate cortex, and it's thought that the posterior cingulate cortex may be involved in self-referential thinking. So what you think about yourself. Now, if you grow up in an abusive environment, or an environment that's not enriched, or trauma, so there is a part of children that will take on the blame for what's happening in their families. And what could be happening, this is what I have theories on everything. So this is one of the theories that I have, is that posterior cingulate cortex starts saying, this is your fault. You're unworthy. If you were only more, better, different, this wouldn't be happening. Now, if that becomes part of your default mode network, when you're at work, when you're doing something, you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
But when you all of a sudden go into that quiet place and we go into the default mode network, the whole, hey, you're unworthy, you should have done it this way. You can't do this, starts coming out in a default state. So we poor humans are faced with this inner critic that when we become quiet, starts beaking at us. So it's no wonder we anxious people don't like meditation. It's no wonder we
Right.
fill our time up with everything. If I have to be somewhere at 11:15, I'll get there at 11:14 or 11:16. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not early for anything because I'm afraid. I'm much better now than I used to be. But I used to have to fill in every second of every day because if I got quiet, things would start to bother me. And I didn't know it was the default mode network, but now I do. Again, not proven, but there's mounting evidence to show that this is probably what's happening. And the default mode network is sort of tuned into worry. So if you think I'm incapable, I can't handle anything, if that come in, then your brain will go, yeah, of course you can't, because you've got this, you've got this, you've got this. And old Goggins' quote comes up and says the mind has a tactical advantage over you in default mode. So how are you going to frickin' overcome that?
I think that's a fantastic theory. I think one of the exciting things about what's happening in, or I guess what we're understanding more about the brain in neuroscience is that plasticity doesn't end when the brain stops developing at, 24, 25, 26.
Yep.
That neuroplasticity is possible throughout your entire life. So if we're thinking about your theory of the PCC and the default mode network kind of in tandem, what
Right.
happens when we relax? What are some ways that we can use the truth of neuroplasticity to address some of those things? Or, I've been really curious about things like that there are critical learning periods for people. So, like, if kids miss the language learning window, they won't learn language. Like that awful story of
Horse and a
Jeannie.
weasel.
I'm thinking of the girl who was, severely abused when she was a child and
Oh, right.
wasn't spoken to and stuff, and she never developed language because they missed that critical learning period. And so I guess I'm curious, like, obviously through experience we can see that people are able to change that inner narrative and that
Mhm.
inner dialogue. But I'm curious about the tactics of employing neuroplasticity to change some of those underlying
Right.
uh, subconscious things
Right.
that are happening in order to affect our conscious
And I was
lives.
just thinking about this morning because I wake up. I set the night before I go to sleep. I say you're going to wake up with some revelations tomorrow morning. So this morning I woke up with the fact that yes, neuroplasticity is real. It occurs right through the lifespan, but like everything else, height, nose size, there's a variation in that. So some brains are very neuroplastic. They're able to heal from things, they're able to move past things, but some brains aren't, whether or not it's brain derived neural growth factor or they don't quite have the right building blocks or their DNA is methylated so much, they're in so much in protective mode that they can't actually change quickly. But there's a variation, I think, in that. I think there are things that we can do. One of the things that I will often tell people when they're trying to change and enhance neuroplasticity is start learning a new language. Go online, learn Spanish or learn French or play a musical instrument. Learn how to play the guitar, because when you do that, and especially if you like it, like, don't just, I gotta learn freaking Swahili, right? No, it's like if you like it really helps build that brain derived neural growth factor and all that things that enhance neuroplasticity. So that's what I would suggest to people is, as you're trying to rewire some of these old, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, I'm all this sort of stuff. If you can start doing something that increases your ability to be neuroplastic, you are going to engage those things and rewire those things so much quicker. But there may be a certain ceiling for everybody. Some people may be great neuroplasticityers. Other people may not be. You don't know that, but give yourself the best possible chance by, learning a musical instrument or learning Spanish or something like that. Something that gives you the building blocks for change. And when you're trying to change, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, take a break. Even that may be too long. 10 minutes, take a break. 10 minutes, take a break. 10 minutes, take a break. Because the hippocampus needs some time to reorganize, to rewire this sort of stuff. If you stack all this stuff on top of the brain's just going to go, I'm overloaded. You're actually going at cross purposes to trying to help yourself. And that's one thing about healing from mental dysregulation, anxiety, depression, OCD, whatever it is. It takes time, and you need that downtime. That's why sleep is so important. That's why downtime is so important. When you're rewiring things, it needs a chance to kind of myelinate. It needs a chance to kind of start to ground in there where it becomes part of the furniture. And you can't force it. I see these things on like cure your anxiety in a week with this new program. It's like, every time I see that, I was like, I want to bang my head against something. Because, if I said to you, Morgan, I'm going to teach you how to unlearn how to ride a bike in 2 days. Have you seen that YouTube video about the backwards bike?
Yes.
Yeah.
It makes
So
my brain hurt even just watching
I
it.
know it took that guy 9 months to be able to learn how to ride the
Oh,
backwards bike.
wow. Wow.
Took his son, who was like 13 or 14, about 3 months. So it's
Wow.
kind of like there's, speaking about our little neuroplasticity thing in there, that's part of it. So it's learning these unconscious programs that have been put in us, these protective unconscious programs that have been put in us since we were children by us. Typically, it's an inside job. Don't get erased. We have to put something else either over them or beside them, so that we create a new pathway that the brain can take, as opposed to the old, the groove, the default mode network, whatever it is, the old groove that just takes you back into worry town.
I want everyone who has written 50 New Year's resolutions to listen to this part again, that it takes time and that your brain
It
needs
does.
breaks.
Trying to heal from anxiety is really labeling it as alarm, because that's what it is. It's a sense of alarm that's stuck in your body. Not with everybody, because we can't say something is always, but most of the time. So when you're feeling anxious, go into your body, see if you can find a sensation there that's like pressure or pain or nausea or fullness or something. Is it superficial? Is it deep? Does it have a color? Does it have a temperature? You can really go into that and find it in your body, as opposed to being stuck in your head. For years, I was stuck in my head. I didn't even know that I had this alarm in my body until I took LSD.
Mm.
And then the LSD said, hey, you know what? This anxiety that you think has been in your head for the last 35 years, actually, no, it's actually sitting in your solar plexus right now. And after that, my healing really took a turn for the better, because I was actually, as we were talking before we went on, you're actually going at the root cause, as opposed to just trying to heal a symptom. So just trying to think better, just trying to not be worried so much doesn't work, because your mind will completely bow down to how your body feels. Your body will point the direction of your mind. So if your body is feeling alarmed, your mind, the tactical advantage of your mind, will point out all the negative things that's going to happen to you, or could happen to you. And what may be worse, anything good that tries to come in just gets ignored. Right. And it's the same the other way. So when you're feeling good, when your body's feeling good, you start thinking, oh, this could be great. Oh, I'll do this and I'll do that. This will be great. Oh, we'll have this. And then a bad thought comes in and say, it's not going to happen. So it's just amazing how much your body influences your mind, and how traditional therapies just, well, they just say it's like a red flag at a date. Well, I don't like that, but I'm just going to ignore it.
Right.
We don't like it.
One of the things that I found about moments when I'm really starting to head down the tubes and the anxiety swirls is it's impossible to logic my way out of
Right.
whatever I'm feeling. It's almost like the signal goes to the brain, and the brain does what the brain does, which is make predictions about what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your model of having anxiety be split into alarm and anxiety is tremendously helpful, because then it doesn't seem so much like trying to eat the elephant
Yeah.
in
In
one
one
huge
bite.
bite.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is too. Because your mind is designed to think. We are a very left-brained
Hmm.
society. So, and the brain, we get so much practice. This is what I say about Most anxious people that I met are usually quite smart. Because if you think about it, if you've been going to the brain gym every day since you've been 6 years old,
Hmm.
you're going to get pretty darn good at thinking. The problem is that you're not going to get so good at feeling. And one of the catchphrases that I like to use is healing from anxiety is not so much about feeling better, it's getting better at feeling, allowing yourself to feel all the feelings that are going through you. And there is that saying that feelings last 60 to 90 seconds. And I think maybe in a healthy nervous system, maybe,
Hmm.
but in someone who's got trauma, who's someone who had horrible uncertainty in their childhood, and they didn't even have to have horrible uncertainty. They just had to be born sensitive. Like, I can ask you, which of your two kids is the most sensitive? And you can tell me immediately which one is the most sensitive, right? So
Yep.
there is evidence to suggest that our temperament is genetic. Our sensitivity is genetic. So if you're born sensitive in an environment where you're loved and cared for, and you're seen, heard, open to, understood, loved, and protected, you're going to be fine. But if you're born sensitive in an environment where there's divorce, there's addiction, there's abuse, you're probably not going to do that well.
Hmm. I really like the what you said about our brains going to the brain gym. And the thought that keeps coming up for me is how important it is to integrate movement into
Mm.
new methods of learning. So, as we're doing something like learning a new language, I like the advice to learn an instrument because you're including your body in the learning,
Yeah.
which, as you were talking about yoga, we're moving into positions that we're not normally in. We're putting our body in postures that we're not normally in, and that's a great way to rewire things in our brains. And one of the things I like to tell people is you just travel. Travel,
Yeah.
because it's rife with uncertainty. It's
Yeah.
also a great way for your mind to be so employed with, just trying to do things that are so easy to do when you're in your natural
Yeah.
environment, that it's a great way to bump yourself out of any of your normal ways of thinking and patterns of thinking.
And you will run into problems and you will solve them, because we do live in a society that's just too freaking easy.
Mm.
It's just too, we're not getting, this is what our children are suffering, because they're not getting enough adversity. Now, I don't mean trauma, but I mean adversity. I mean rising above adversity, staying in your body, understanding that when you got bullied, it's like, okay, we're going to help you repair that. That's a logical, what you're feeling is a logical reaction to being ostracized by your friends. We can stay with that. I will help you with that. It's like, oh, dad, what do you know? It's like, well, I don't know. But we can use touch. We can use that sort of repair. Like, a child who goes through adversity and gets repair is much more emotionally, has much more emotional capacity than a child who gets raised in an environment where there's no fighting, everything is calm, nothing goes wrong. It's just, and we're not getting enough adversity. We're just not. So it's funny, like, now human beings are developing all these things, like, oh, you got to go in a 180-degree sauna for like 25 minutes, or you got to go in a
Uh,
zero ice baths. So it's funny, unconsciously we're pushing ourselves into adversity, because we know that when we're in adversity and we rise above it, we gain a little bit of capacity in our nervous system when we do that. But if we just take the car to the store every time, and we don't really, take a cold shower, or we don't really challenge ourselves, we get really weak. We get really soft. So when something does come along, we can't handle it.
yeah, it's the in nature, things thrive when they don't have everything readily available to
Yeah,
them. Like the roots of the trees go down deep when the water is scarce.
totally.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And introducing more positive stress or eustress into our lives in order to grow and become stronger.
And repair. And
And
repair
repair.
with yourself. Put yourself into a situation where you're going to get uncomfortable, and then you repair and start slow. You don't have to go out and run a 15K the first day you put on your shoes, right? Um, it's just put yourself through some adversity, and then really relish the fact that you made it through it. Or you didn't make it through it. Say you didn't make it through the whole race or whatever it is. Relish the fact there that you put yourself to the limit and then you couldn't do anymore, because the next time you build some resilience. So it's like, we learn much more from our mistakes than we do from our successes.
100%. I want to go back to something that we like kind of zipped over,
Sure.
and that's LSD. So,
Okay.
anyone who's listened to this podcast long enough knows that I have an interest in psychedelics and psychedelic assisted therapy, and I know that you have had what I understand is fairly extensive experiences with using psychedelics for self
Yes
development. And
and no,
I'm
Morgan. Last time I did psychedelics was 2015. So it's been
okay.
10 years now. So I did ayahuasca twice. I've done MDMA twice. I've done psilocybin twice. So it's and one of the psilocybins was a microdose.
Mm,
So yeah, I'm aware of it. It did give me LSD was probably the thing that gave me the biggest revelation because that was the first psychedelic that I did. And I had just come back from India. I had an experience of enlightenment there for 90 minutes on a rooftop at 4:30 in the morning as the sun came up, and it was like, okay, I'm going to chase this feeling for the rest of my life. This was pretty
mm.
amazing. Now in my body, I have that feeling. I know how to reproduce it, not to the same extent, of course, but I know it's there. I've seen the other side. I've seen that part where you're one with everything. I've been there. It was about 90 minutes long. And when I came back, I just felt completely empty and hollow. Like I had lived at that temple for like 6 weeks. And my anxiety was probably worse than it had ever been at that point because I went there thinking someone had said, hey, you go to this temple and you come back anxiety free because that's what happened to me. And, I want to kick that guy in the balls because that did not happen to me. It got way worse when I got back. So my
Yeah.
friend, who was kind of an expert in food as medicine and that kind of thing, took me on an LSD journey. And that's as I was coming out of LSD, that's when I got the message. And I still don't exactly know how that the anxiety I felt was in my solar plexus. It was in there from growing up with a schizophrenic father, going through episodes of bullying through school, not all the way through school, but there was points where it was pretty intense. And that's all in there. And until I made friends with that and stopped, sort of internally criticizing myself for that in my default mode network, I had a chance to start rewiring and coming out of that fog. And LSD definitely showed me that the anxiety that I felt had more to do with this alarm stored in my body than the thoughts of my mind. And the thoughts of my mind were basically just reacting, or they were reactions of this interoception. My mind had to make sense of it. So it gave me all these worries.
What led up to the 6 week experience at the temple? What
Um,
did your life look like before
yeah,
that? And
I was a quote unquote successful doctor. Um, I was doing stand up 3 or 4 nights a week. I was touring with Yuck Yucks comedy club as a comedian across Canada, and I loved stand up. I was anxious all the way through it. There. I don't think there was a point uh, between 2004 and 2014 where I wasn't racked with anxiety, at least for points of the day. There's other points that were fine. And they say that, life's too short. For me, life was too long. Like if it's
mm,
like, I've got another 40 years of this, I'm not doing it. Like I am not doing it. So I came back from India and my friend sort of said, let's do this. And that gave me the insight that I needed to kind of move forward because I felt like I was making some progress now in a place that I'd never been before. Like when you said that whole alarm anxiety distinction has helped so many people just realize, oh, okay. Because when you see them for what they truly are, there's something in us, in our consciousness that goes, oh, that makes sense. And now I can do something about it,
mhm.
as opposed to trying to eat the elephant in one bite. I don't know what your original
Yeah.
question was there.
Oh, I was asking what led up to the decision to go
Oh yeah.
to India, and that I mean that makes perfect sense. So, like when you say that you were racked with anxiety and that
Yep.
day in and day out, and that it got worse, what did that look like? What did that feel like? So, I'm
Okay.
imagining people who have many anxious thoughts or would label themselves as an anxious person or have anxiety,
Yeah.
um, want to hear someone say, "This is what it feels like in my body."
Okay. So here's a day. So let's take a Friday in my life, 2012. So I'm practicing in an urgent care clinic downtown Vancouver. I wake up in complete alarm, right? So wake up in complete alarm, do some breathing, do some yoga, because I got certified as a yoga teacher back in 2007. An hour into that, I'm like, okay, I can breathe again. I'm doing okay. I'm still, worried about, how the shift is going to go. And then I've got a show that night. So, and Friday night, so there's going to be two shows. There's going to be one at 8 o'clock, and then there's going to be one at 10:30. How am I going to do the show? There's no way I'm going to be able to do the show. I'm just too, I can't remember any of my jokes. I can't remember
Mm.
how to interact with people. And then I would get to work around 10, do a 10 to 4 shift. And while I was at work, I was generally okay because my mind was, I'm dealing with people at a fairly intense level, and my mind is focused. My default mode network isn't active. So I'm like, okay, I'm making it through the day. And then by 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm kind of looking forward to actually going on stage again tonight. Like I'm kind of looking forward to it. I may, I saw a sign that I think I could make a joke out of. I could do some stuff that way. So by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, I'm not anxiety free, but I'm kind of optimistic, right? So then I would go downtown, go to Quiznos. I don't know if you guys have Quiznos, but it's basically, get a sandwich outside of the club, and then go in, sit in the green room. If I was hosting that night, the show would start right at 8. So I would get ready. I'd go out. I'd do about 10 minutes off the top. I'd tell people who was going to be on the show. While I was doing it, felt pretty good. And then we do the first show, then we do the second show. And at the end of the second show, I'm feeling great. Like everything's good. My life is good. Why was I so anxious this morning? Like everything is actually pretty damn good. Then I go to bed, and then I wake up the next morning, same thing. Horrible alarm, go through the whole process, Groundhog Day, did that for years. Years I did that. I woke up every single morning in this state of alarm, and it would last somewhere between an hour and 3 hours. Sometimes it would go through the whole day. That was rare, but for the most part, I would have anxiety alarm every day. And I would just have to distract myself, go to the gym. By the end of the day, it would, there was a real diurnal variation in my anxiety. And other people say they have the opposite. In the morning, they feel good. And as they go through the day, they get more and more anxious. And then as night comes, then the anxiety really hits them. Right.
Mm.
So, but mine has always been morning anxiety. It's always been that. But I wake up, and I wrote about this in the book. It's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do a show tonight. There's just no way, which just shows you how irrational your mind becomes, because there was no night that I couldn't do a show. Didn't matter how petrified I was when I woke up in the morning. I always was able to go and do a show at night.
What types of alarm signals were you getting in your body?
There was sort of a deep pressure or pain right in my solar plexus area, right where my ribs meet. It was hot, kind of burning. And again, I didn't really zero in on it back then. I just felt, it felt like my whole body was upset. Like I couldn't settle. There was things I couldn't eat. There was one, I would have cans of tuna in my apartment, because on the days where I was so anxious I couldn't eat, I would just eat a can of tuna because I knew I had to get some sort of protein in somehow. So that's how I would do it. I wasn't enjoying the taste of the tuna, because typically I like tuna. I wasn't enjoying the taste of it. I was basically just shoveling it down just so that my body would have some nutrients to work from. Because I knew that if I didn't eat, which was easy, I could not. There was points where I could go 12 hours without eating, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm getting really hungry. This is really uncomfortable not eating. It was like, I'm fine not eating. So it was one of those things where it was just survival. And so that kind of said, oh, things have to change. And then I ran into this psychologist that I knew from years earlier. And she said, I just got back from this temple in India, and if you want to, you can go there. I can put in a word for you and stuff. It's like, well, okay, because I'm desperate. And that's what I did. And then I did it. And it did provide me with some, some things that I still use today, as far as like the meditation and the yoga and the just sort of seeing things with this dispassionate kind of observational curiosity. I think I learned that from the temple. But when I got back, I thought I had myself all expectationed up that this was going to cure me. And I got back, I was worse. So
Hmm.
that's why I did the LSD. So it was kind of like, you know, yeah, anxiety was like a daily fight for me. And even now when I look back on it, it's like my life is so much better now. Like it's just night and day. Like I cannot believe, and I still get alarmed. Like it's not
Hmm.
like I am anxiety or alarm free by any means at all. Christmas lights it up because that was the time my dad would choose to go schizophrenic, bipolar, wind up either horribly depressed, not leaving his bedroom, or wind up in the mental institution for 6 weeks over Christmas. So Christmas for me, there's a lot of body memories associated with it. Much better now, but still, I still get alarmed. And now what I do when I get alarmed, it's like I just sit with it and I just see it as the younger version of me
Hmm.
who's upset. And I try to put my hand over it. I try to breathe in. I have these meditations that I make. So I listen to those. I connect with that younger version of me because I think that's where the alarm originates from, is the younger version of me. And that really helps. So when people say, have you healed from your alarm anxiety, I say, yeah, I think I have. I mean, there's always scars left when you heal, so it's not like it's completely gone. But my life is infinitely better than it was. Like I actually want to live now. Back then I was putting in time, and it was like I remember going on planes or whatever. It's like, if this plane crashes, I'm good. you know I'm fine. I'm done. I wasn't going to kill myself, although that did come into my mind. But if something happened to me, it was like, I guess that's just how the how the world goes, right?
Hmm.
So it's just funny how your cognition gets so skewed, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why when things get worse, they tend to just keep getting worse. So you have to really get in there and start doing things that interrupt that cycle, interrupt that alarm anxiety cycle. And one of the big things that I tell people with anxiety is, okay, separate it into anxiety, anxious thoughts of your mind, and alarm in your body, and just focus on the alarm and comfort the alarm and give. That's what your brain has to do, as opposed to getting into the worries, because the worries will never end. As Martha Beck calls it, I think she calls it the hall of mirrors, right? It just,
Hmm.
there's no escape from it. You're just, as soon as you, and that's the other thing I say about worries is you can't beat thoughts on your own turf. That's one of my favorite sayings that I made up. And like those carnival midway games, but you throw the ring on top of the Coke bottle
Hmm.
and stuff. The only way to win that game is to not play it,
Hmm.
right? So, and that's what I say to myself about the worry game. It's like the only way to win this game is to not play it. Now, the alarm is not comfortable by any means at all, but at least I'm doing something for the root cause. Because as soon as I go up in my head and start worrying, I've lost everything. Like I'm not making any traction at all. I'm just making things worse, actually. So it's learning, how do we connect with that alarm in our body, which is really the younger version of ourselves. And that's what I write my books about. That's what my MBRX program is about. It's really about connecting to yourself. So in my program, I put a yoga nidra in there, deep, what Andrew Huberman calls non-sleep deep rest,
Hmm.
but it's designed to join your mind and your body together, and your adult self and your child self together. That's what that meditation is for. And a lot of people love that meditation and do it every day, because it's really, like I said, anxiety is a separation of yourself. And it's, if you can join your adult self with your child self and your mind to your body, the alarm has no choice but to recede. And when the alarm recedes, that's what's driving your worries. So, I get worries every once in a while now, and I almost laugh at them. It's like, well, your buddy alarm hasn't kind of come in there to kind of double team me. So on your own, you're actually ridiculous.
Huh. That reminds me of in the Harry Potter movies where the students have to fight the boggart. I don't know if this is familiar to any of my listeners at all, but essentially, like the thing comes out of the wardrobe and it looks like their greatest fear, and
Yep.
the spell that they have to cast is to make it be something they can laugh at.
Right.
And I really like the this encouragement that healing doesn't mean that those things don't still happen.
Yes.
Healing is in our ability to exercise choice and to have a tool of an arsenal of tools at our disposal
Right.
that help us be with it instead of run away from it.
Hmm.
I was on a walk the other day and was sat down by this creek, and the rocks were really pokey. They were poking me in the butt so hard. And in this moment, I watched myself go from feeling the pain and thinking I need to shift, or maybe I'll get up, from the thoughts shifting into what is the sensation actually feeling like. And there was this beautiful separation of the thoughts about the pain and just the sensation of the rocks poking me in the butt. And it's, it maybe sounds like a very simple, like, what kind of thing, but if we can exercise that type of awareness around the alarm signals in our body, that's when everything starts to change, because then you look at the racing heart, or like for me, it starts out maybe with like the tingling sensation in my hands or my feet, or this feeling of being this flush of energy from head to toe. If I can just observe that and just watch myself experiencing that and catch it before it goes into, this means I'm going to have a panic attack, or
Right.
interpreting the signals in a particular way, that's the healing.
Yeah.
The healing isn't that doesn't happen anymore. The healing is in being able to be with myself when I feel those things.
Yeah. Because the next time the child in you says, "Oh, I'm not alone. Last
Mm,
time she was with me, so we're okay." So I think it's really important to, and it's kind of like when you said about the feeling the rocks and just sort of almost describing it. When we go into curiosity, we move out of fear because we're using a different part of our brain. So curiosity is and creativity are such massively good ways of pulling ourselves out of that old spiral, because that old spiral is that trauma vortex is so rooted, like it's a 12-lane superhighway, right? So if we can move out of that, and kind of reminds me a bit too of Michael Singer's like, "You are not your thoughts," right?
mm,
There's a separation from that. And once you see the separation of alarm from anxiety, it empowers you. You start saying, "Oh, okay, so I can feel the alarm without actually coupling thoughts to it." Because
mm.
once you do that, then you can start processing the alarm. Now, sometimes you need help with that because the alarm in you is so intense, but at least you're going at the root cause and not sort of, defaulting into worry, which basically just keeps digging you deeper into that hole.
Yeah. When someone is attempting to pay attention to the alarm signals in their body and have a different type of relationship with it, um, what are some signs that perhaps they need some additional help? So,
Yeah,
it seems to me like there are some things that, yes, you're able to be with yourself in,
right.
but what would be some practical ways that someone could say, "Oh, okay, like I need to actually like put a lid back on that until I'm with someone else who can help me process this."
I think most people know when they can't touch something because it's overwhelming. I'm like that with chocolate brownies in the fridge. Like I tell the people in the house, do not get chocolate brownies and because I cannot not eat them. Like I can't
Yep.
not eat chocolate brownies. Like if you put them in my fridge, I will fight with myself for about 8 seconds and then I will eat them. Right. So I think it's just understanding yourself, like how much is too much,
Mm,
and knowing that we have to titrate this. So say, for example, you were hit by your parent, right? So can you touch into that? Can you go into an episode where they didn't mean to hit you, or whatever, and can you stay with that for a second, or does it completely take you over and you go right into the whole fear? Can you, what we call titrated, can you take little bits of that old alarm and see if you can just process it, see what we call dip your toe in it, and you just dip your
mm,
toe in that, knowing that you can come right out again. But sometimes it just sucks you in like a Harry Potter thing, like it'll suck you right in. And if that's the case, you probably need a little help as far as that goes too. I mean, my MBRX program is really good for helping people really understand where their anxiety comes from, and There's meditations in there to find your alarm. There's meditations in there to calm you down. It's like $97. It's like when I had, business people, they say, you should sell this for $1,000. It's like, I don't want to sell it for $1,000. I don't need the money. What I need is as many people reading my books and getting help as possible. That's what I want is so just get my work out to as many places as I possibly can. And because I don't want you to have to suffer with anxiety the way that I did, because you don't have to. You don't have to. Traditional therapy has it wrong. They think that anxiety is an issue of the mind. It's not. It's an issue of old alarm, not always, but old alarm stuck in your body. And the sooner you realize that and start addressing that, the sooner you're going to start get better. Trying to change your thoughts, going to talk therapy, going to CBT will make you feel better in the short term. There's nothing wrong with those things. It's just that you're not really going after the root cause.
When did you shift from a clinical practice and into what you're doing now?
So 2013, I ruptured my left Achilles tendon fully.
Youch.
So I needed surgery. Yeah. So I needed surgery. And I was already burned out at that particular point. I was doing stand up, 4 or 5 nights a week, that kind of thing. And work in the clinic probably three shifts a week at that point. And that was it. It was like, I can't do that anymore. It's like your typical Gabor Mate, the body said no. It's like, you're not doing this anymore. And then for about a year, as I was rehabbing my leg and that kind of stuff too, I sort of thought, I'll go back to my clinic. My clinic certainly wanted me back. And then I think that's when I went to India. Yeah, because I remember going to India with a boot, with one of those boot casts. Right. And I remember, yeah. So it was kind of like, that's when I went there. I came back. I was like, nope, not doing the medicine thing anymore. I pushed myself into that career for, I think, a feeling of like status and control. And the story behind that is that I was always paranoid. The reason I developed anxiety, I believe, is that I was always super paranoid about developing my father's mental illness, because it was so devastating to watch. It was just so painful. And so just to see someone's life taken from them like that was just horrible. So I thought, okay, well, if I get to 25, I go through med school. If I make it through med school at 25 and I don't get schizophrenia, I'm not going to, because typically if you don't get schizophrenia by 25, you're probably not going to. And then at 30, I'm graduating med school at 30. I haven't got schizophrenia yet. So I thought, okay, well, I'm probably good. And then when I hit 35, it was like, okay, I think I'm probably pretty good. So that's what sort of drove me into medicine. Is like, I almost did it as a dare to myself, like go through medical school, become a doctor. Because if you can make it through that stress, that'll prove to you that you don't have schizophrenia. So that'll prove to you you're not mentally ill. But med school and medical practice made me medically ill. So I was like, okay. So now it's like, I lost. I'm out, So, and that's why, yeah, I left in 2013, and I haven't been back to clinical practice since then.
So what, I guess, what would you like say that your title is now in the way that you work with people?
Well, I still use my medical doctor. I still use, if I see someone who I suspect may have thyroid issues, or, it's like some sort of metabolic thing that's driving their anxiety, I can still send them to their doctor and suggest that they do this panel of blood tests. So I retain my sort of mental framework. I did it for so many years that I can, you can hang me upside down and assault me, and I can pretty much still write out a lab rec for things that I think people need. So I try and use my medical degree in a way of sort of background health. What is it, that you could be, what could be causing this from a metabolic situation? And then I trained in somatic experiencing. My wife is a somatic experiencing practitioner. She's getting sort of higher up in that field, and she's an assistant, and she does all these trainings and that kind of thing too. So she and I bounce back and forth like somatic therapy stuff all the time. And I have this client that does this. What would you recommend? We go back and forth that way. Developmental psychology with the Neufeld Institute, I did sort of master's level training over there. There's 500 hours of develop, because most mental illness starts in childhood. Most of it does. So I understand how children should develop. They're not developing that way these days. So, I guess what I do now, almost for medical purposes, medical legal purposes, I just call myself a coach, like an anxiety
Mm.
coach, because that's not that regulated. And that has its own issues too, because everybody with an idea that they can heal can just sort of say, "Hey, I'm a therapist."
Yeah.
And so I'm certified in somatic experiencing therapy. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher. I'm certified in that. Medicine, you never lose that. You always carry that sort of
Mm.
doctor title as your MD. Um, that's kind of, what I use and humor. I use a lot of humor and a lot of
Mm.
play, which we didn't talk too much about today, but play is so critical in neuroplasticity and helping people heal. And I see people, the loneliness epidemic, people
Mm.
stop playing. And like, what did you do when you were younger? What did you do when you were a teenager for play? Did you ride your bike? Did you paint? What did you do? Go back, because you're probably going to enjoy those same things again. Play is so important because it activates the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system at the same time.
Mm.
The other thing that does that is trauma.
Mm.
So you're, in a way, with play, you're kind of revisiting the trauma in a very sublimated way, in a way that you can actually start to process it. But unfortunately, as we get older, we lose play, and tears are so important, to be able to sort of process things. And Gordon Neufeld kind of taught me that too. He says, tears are an adaptive process. And if you can't cry, and I think this is one of the reasons why men kill themselves at the rate 4 times as women, because as boys, crying is pushed out of us. I knew over Christmas that I had to have a bunch of tears, yet I couldn't get there because
Mm.
it's that the conditioning was so deep. What will get me to tears is frustration. So if I can't fix something, so what I should do is I should probably just order an IKEA desk, know that I can't put it together, and just start throwing my toys, and that'll probably
Mm.
put me into tears.
Huh. That's that's really funny. Like to pay attention to the things that activate us and to use them to our advantage.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a
Car
really
screaming.
powerful.
Car
Yeah.
screaming is one of the best for men, I
Oh,
think.
that's one of my choices for
Oh,
sure.
just go to a quiet area, roll up
Hmm.
the windows and just have at it. Like the amount of damage, short-term damage I've done to my voice from car screaming. And often that's a good point, because car screaming will often push me into tears, because it gets me into this frustration point where it's like I can't hold it back anymore. But as far as getting the tears through sadness, I can't do it. It's just
Mm.
it's too ingrained in me from childhood that I just can't, I won't allow myself to get, maybe I will, as I get older, I don't know. But it's for men, I think it's just so hard. And it's so important to be able to have that release, because it does, Wayne Dyer sort of says, it's like, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. The things haven't changed. Like, your dog is still dead, you're still getting a divorce, but your perception of those things is so much easier and easier on yourself after a bunch of tears. But it's not a very manly thing to say, for sure. So it's hard. It's hard. And it's just, I think there are quick ways to help you with mental health. Tears are one of them, but unfortunately, men won't do it, and it's the men who need
Mm.
men that need it the most are the ones that resist it the most.
Hmm.
So, you know, there we are.
Yeah, I was going to ask about what are some ways as parents that we can um, avoid traumatizing our children in
Take their phones
in
away. Like, not all the time.
God, we could do a whole podcast episode on
Oh
that.
yeah. Oh, for
I have
sure.
so many big feelings
Oh
about that.
yeah. Oh, for sure. So yeah, it's I think Jonathan Haidt
I
coined
was
this term
just going to
called
reference that book, The Anxious
phone-based
Generation.
childhood.
Hmm.
Like, when I was young, we would leave the house at 7:30, and we would come back at 10:30, and our parents had no idea where we are. Like,
Yeah.
none. you know so now, that I think in his book, Jonathan Haidt said that, I guess a woman let her 13-year-old, I think it was 13-year-old, go to the store, and someone said, why are you letting this child, this is child abuse, and they called Child Protective Services on this. What are we doing to our kids? We're telling them that, everything's unsafe. Like, No wonder our kids are struggling so badly with anxiety, is that we're telling them that everything's unsafe. Because we're so
Mm.
hyper vigilant, the kids look at us and go, well, if you're so hyper vigilant, then we must be unsafe. And that's actually not true.
I imagine that some of the things that contribute to like our kids feeling lonely is when we get in these like silos where everybody thinks the same way that we do.
Mm,
Um, we miss out on what is necessary for developing empathy,
yeah.
you know? And so I guess what I'm hearing is allow our children to play, encourage them to play,
Yeah. Give them some
encourage them,
independence.
give them independence,
Yeah.
help them
Challenge
feel
them.
their feelings.
Challenge them with repair on the other side.
Mm,
It's really important to push them past their comfort zone, but make sure that repair comes every single time after. Um, Touch, so important. Ask them. I have this acronym that I use for, and I call it what you should have gotten. And I think I mentioned
mm,
it early on in our talk today. It's what you should have got when you were younger. You should have been seen for who you are. You should have been heard. What you said should have been taken in and respected. You should have been open to. Our parents needed to open to us rather than being, I'm your father, you will do this. Understood, because the template for understanding yourself is when your parent makes an effort to understand you. If your
mm.
parent makes no effort to understand you, you don't have a template to understand yourself. Then love is L. That goes without saying. And then defend. Defend that child that's in you. So do that with the child that's in you now. See them, hear them, open to them, understand them, love them, and defend them. That's kind of how you heal from anxiety.
Mm, I love that. Is there, before we go, is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you would really, any bits of wisdom or information or things that you've been learning lately that you'd like to
I
impart to the
mean,
listeners?
been working a lot on loneliness lately, like not personally, maybe personally, I don't know. But just the 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 load, the allostatic load of loneliness on people these days. The fact that we're not connected, the fact that we're all fighting on social media, the fact that we're being divided, the whole vaccine, the horror vaccines are the worst thing in the world. No, they're not. They're great. Sound like Seinfeld a bit there. No, they're not. They're great. Yeah. But, um, the fact that we're getting so separate and the more stress that we get, the more we believe our beliefs are who we are. So if you disagree with someone's belief, you are actually demoting them in the world. They're not as valuable in their own eyes and in yours, maybe. So we're just separating. We're separating all the time, and all anxiety is separation anxiety. Mostly separation from yourself, but separation from other people too. So the more separate we become, the more anxious as a society will become, and the more dependent on substances, internet, shopping, whatever. That's what'll happen because we need love, and we will find it. We will find it chemically. We will find whatever it is to feel good. We will find it,
Yeah, because like you said, if we don't like the life that we're in, we can't imagine doing it for the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
and that's why
Why
men
would
kill
you want
themselves.
to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
And that's why
they don't
that's
see any
why
way
we
out.
numb ourselves for through any sort of
Yeah.
different tools.
And what I would
Yeah.
probably end on is like, when I went through my little suicidal phase, fairly short, but fairly intense, you don't, suicide seems like the only option because you look right and it's abhorrently painful. You look left and it's abhorrently painful and you can't see a way out. But what I often say is that the way out was there because clearly I'm still here.
Mm,
I just couldn't see it at the time. So when you're in that place, it may seem like there's no way out, but there is a door, but you can't see it,
mm.
and you just keep going and the door will show up. Just keep looking after yourself, keep connecting with yourself, keep looking at yourself in as loving and a compassionate way as you can, as hard as that may be. If you grow up in an environment where there's lots of self-judgment and you have a huge inner critic, you can turn that around.
Mm.
It takes some time, and I create meditations for things all the time, and I'm happy to kind of share that in my group, my MBRX group. Join that group. Like, that really helps people with anxiety. There's a community. I meet with them once a month. It gives them some community. It gives them some connection, and you don't feel like such a freak. Because with anxiety, like we feel weak, we feel like we're less than, right? Because we have anxiety. And I tell people, like, you know, you have to go to school, raise your kids, go to the grocery store. You have to do everything everyone else does, but you have to do it with 100 pounds of pure on your back. So stop telling yourself that you're weak, because you have to be actually really strong to go through what you've gone through and just live your life with 100 pounds of fear on your back all the time.
Mm. What a wonderful way to end. I will, of course, link to all of your things in the episode notes. And thank you very much for being so generous with your time and
Thanks,
your
Morgan.
expertise today. I appreciate it a lot. And for all of my listeners, before we go, P.S. We expire.